Thank you all for joining today to discuss the film that we just finished watching. My name's Emma. My professional role is with the Jewish Federations in Minneapolis and St. Paul, working with young adults to develop their own leadership skills, to engage them with their Jewish identity and Jewish community, and often to connect them to opportunities they care about, be that social justice or volunteering or other meaningful work. And outside of my professional work, I care deeply about community building and relationship building. I serve for two organizations that deal with exactly that work, the National Council of Jewish Women Minnesota and the Jewish Community Relations Council of Minnesota and the Dakotas. I'm a proud board member, and I was asked to moderate this panel today to learn from all of you. First, I just want to say I really enjoyed the film. I've admired the Sisterhood of Salam Shalom's work for years, and I'm excited to hear from all of you, not only about the film, but your experiences in what has been a tumultuous 4 years and a time where I think it's more needed than ever that we find common ground and shared values and experiences. To start, I'd love for each of you to introduce yourself briefly and share a bit about your connection to the Sisterhood. And we'll start with Cheryl.
I'm Cheryl Olitsky. I am the co-founder with the Thea, who you'll meet in a minute, and the executive director of the Sisterhood. I got the idea for the Sisterhood of Salam Shalom on a trip to Poland probably about 11 years ago. I was emotionally devastated by the magnitude of what I saw. And the short story is, I knew that I couldn't change the past, but I could rewrite it and create a much better future by being part of the change. So I met Thea, and we will tell you about the electricity when we met. I'm sure you're going to ask about that. And you saw in the film what happened after that first meeting. It's now a movement across North America and parts of Germany. But that's how it all started.
Katie?
I am not a member of the Sisterhood. I'm one of the filmmakers. I'm co-director with Kirsten Kelly, and we are based in New York City. I was working with an organization called Transform Films, and after the 2016 election, when we were, like so many people in the country, kind of reeling and trying to ground ourselves in what the immediate future was going to look like. As filmmakers, we started looking for stories that might help inspire us and inspire other communities as they started to look for what are movements going to look like over the next 4 years? What does it mean to have grassroots activism that might feel that it's satisfying? And we came across, we read the New York Times article about the Sisterhood, and we went out to film in New Jersey after the Muslim ban. That was the first shooting we did with the Sisterhood. At that time, I really thought this was going to be a 10, 15-minute piece that we kind of got out to the interfaith community very fast. I mean, that was really the intent. And after that night, as Cheryl describes her first meetings around the Sisterhood, I felt very electrified after that night and just could tell that there was a larger story here. And just personally, I wanted a chance to keep filming to understand more about, well, what happens in these chapter meetings? How do these women find each other? And then once they find each other, what do they do next? And how has this gone from being this tiny little organization in New Jersey to being all over the country and now, with international chapters? I really personally longed to understand that process. And with my co-director, Kirsten, we just started filming really all over the country and followed them wherever they would let us go. And I feel really proud and excited that at this moment in time, we can be getting the film out to everybody. Feels like appropriate bookends from election to election, so.
Thank you. And Rachel?
I'm Rachel Spelker. I live in Mendota Heights in Minnesota, and I was invited to a meeting by a friend to go just to her Sisterhood chapter several years ago, and I went and I said to myself, this is something I need to be involved with. And it was the right time in my life with the ages of my kids and what I really wanted to be focusing on. And so I became a co-chair co-founder and co-chair in St. Paul, and now I'm on the national board. And I will say that my work with the Sisterhood is, I feel like, one of the most important, most meaningful, and valuable things that I do in my life. It's just a center point for me. I've made incredible friendships, very deep friendships, shared values, and just great people. And I will say that after the 2016 election and after the Tree of Life shooting, the Sisterhood national conferences were both really on the tail of each of those events. And they were really difficult times. And coming to the Sisterhood of Salam Shalom conference was like this island of beauty and peace and hope in the middle of all this darkness and challenge. And I was so grateful for that. And it's how I feel when I'm with my sisters.
Wonderful. And last but not least, Athia.
Hi, everyone. I'm Atiya Aftab. I am the Muslim co-founder of the Sisterhood of Salam Shalom. And I always say that I resisted Cheryl's reaching out to me to start this organization just because I had every excuse to, busy with work, busy with family. But I thank God that I had the sense and the fortitude to say yes to the hand that she extended to me. So I am the co-founder, I'm the chair of the board, the national organization. Cheryl and I also have our charter chapter that we engage in our community in New Jersey. And the Sisterhood is such a big part of my life, obviously, I guess, since we're also subjects of the film. And not just us, but our families as well. And it has, it's been a journey for me also being part of this process for over 10 years, because as I said, there's every reason not to do things because we are busy with our family, with our work, with our lives, but there's so much beyond, we have to understand that there's so much beyond that. And I'm so grateful to be part of this network of sisters now internationally that we examine our shared values. We realize oftentimes that we don't even have those shared values. So we have, creating these spaces where we can sit down and have sometimes very hard conversations. And I'm just very grateful to be part of it. I'm very grateful that Cheryl found me.
Thank you all. I'm so looking forward to hearing from all of you. To start, when we start the film, we're a bit at the beginning of a journey. And a few of you mentioned in your introductions what that felt like emotionally. And I'm curious to have you think back to the first chapter meeting or first convention or first gathering you attended. What emotions were you experiencing? What surprised you? Putting yourself back on that day, what did you feel? And that's a question for everyone. And so we can start in the same order to respond.
So I'll answer it in two ways. My first meeting with Athia, and it was purely electric. We were at a Starbucks. We didn't know each other. We didn't know what each other looked like. You walked through the door. I saw you. It was a hug. And the whole time we were there, it was, I feel the same way, but that describes me too. And we were just so excited, and we just couldn't hold back our enthusiasm. And then at our first meeting, immediately after, I received phone calls and emails. And to this day, after each new chapter starts, I get the same phone calls and the same emails from sisters. And they also use the word electric. They will tell you they are up all night, as I was, just so excited. And it's a combination of feeling like you can do something to change the divisiveness that surrounds us. It's a feeling that we're making a better world for our children, our grandchildren, those yet to come. And that's what you get when you're together. And that's why people were so excited. The other feeling that I personally had, and that I hear from sisters all the time, is, oh my gosh, I feel like I share more in common with these sisters fact, more in common with my sisters of the other faith than with many people in my life. And it's a safe space, and I share things that I have never allowed myself to share before. And it is just such a great feeling.
Nasli, welcome. Glad you can join us. So we just quickly introduced ourselves and we're on our first question. So Katie, Rachel, and Tia are going to respond, and then we'd love to hear from you as well. I'll send you more in the chat.
Thanks, Emma. Well, it's interesting. I mean, as someone who is coming in as an observer, there's sort of this other perspective. And I remember, going back to that, my first experience being that rally after the Muslim ban. I was really struck by the sense of intentionality that all of the sisters, even in this larger group setting, brought to coming together. That there was an understanding that there was a shared purpose, and that it was both, and there was both activism within the purpose, but there was a desire to connect spiritually in the purpose as well, and that these two things were married, and that they were all aware that these two purposes were married, and that everybody could kind of come in on the same page. And I can't really think of other similar experiences like that, where I felt that everybody was really arriving with that shared perspective because of some of the work they had done, the groundwork that is laid at chapter meetings. I really remember that night Cheryl said, there's so much work to be done with protests and rallies and phone calls and everything, but tonight we are here to heal our souls. I may not be quoting her exactly, but that really stuck with me, as that has to be part of the process for everyone too. Otherwise, you don't kind of have the strength to tackle these other things that need to be tackled unless you kind of keep coming back. And that's what I would see in a lot of the Sisterhood chapter meetings, as well as, they would be having a riot and there's so much laughter at these meetings, and that's part of but there's always this sense of, healing each other's souls is part of the deal. That's what we're here for. And I was always really moved by that.
Well, I think I talked a little bit about my first experiences, but something else I'll just add is that early on in my involvement with a chapter, and actually it was originally a Minneapolis chapter, and we broke off to form a St. Paul one, just geographically it was easier. But in that initial chapter, what I was really struck by was how many similarities our religions and traditions had. So my father died shortly after I got involved in Sisterhood, and just naturally, with people asking me how I was doing, and the Muslim sisters coming to one of the shivas, we started talking about death rituals. And I was just so struck by how many similarities there were in the timeline and traditions and the modesty of dying and being buried in a very simple casket, and how people gather. There were so many overlaps. And similarly, in some of our other discussions in our chapter, just talking about tzedakah, which in Hebrew is tzedakah, and in Arabic is sadaqah, and other words that were really essentially the same word. And so being able to have the commonalities and use that as like a jumping off point to also talking about what is different, that to me was very exciting. And I'm a clergy person in a synagogue, and so a lot of my life really revolves around a Jewish community. But it's always been very important to me to not only live in a Jewish bubble, and to be able to have friends and colleagues and a social life that involves other people. And so this was really so important to me for that reason as well, to be able to have dialogue and to be able to have partners for social justice from shared values.
So I will say Amin and Amen to what Cheryl talked about when we first met that first day in Starbucks. And if you kind of looked at it from the outside, you might think, wow, we came from a different, I'd say half generation, Cheryl. We're not completely out of the same generation. Say a different half generation. Cheryl was a grandmother already at that point. I had young children at that point, different professions, different religions, different social circles. We had every reason not to meet. We had every reason not to connect. But what we immediately discovered in our conversation is that we shared so many common dreams. We shared so many common challenges. And that was really amplified when we gathered, I'd say about a month later, for our first chapter meeting with me and Cheryl and 5 other Jewish women, 5 other Muslim women. And we immediately just could not stop talking over each other, as sometimes women do when we gather. And it was, as Rachel just mentioned, it was not just finding out how many things we had in common and how many shared history, actually, from kind of a scriptural point of view, but it was also an opportunity to break down some stereotypes, some very basic stereotypes about who, what does a live Muslim look like? What does a live Jewish person look like? Many Muslims think that, and me included, that, we know a lot about Judaism because Judaism is spoken about in our Muslim tradition, in our text, but that's not the same thing as how someone lives their religion. And and so it was really interesting to me when I'd hear a Jewish woman, one of my Jewish sisters, say, "Oh, you believe in Moses too? Or you believe in some of these same stories?" And also that we immediately realized we actually shared so many of the same challenges, the challenges of being active women in our religious institutions, the challenges we had being accepted. And I would say I learned a lot from my Jewish sisters in that regard. I feel that there are many light years ahead of us in terms of their institutional presence, as well as women participating in these institutions. And there's also, there's a lot of baggage. There was a lot of baggage that we were able to, I think, disseminate, or I don't know if disseminate is the right word, or to overcome. And as we'll probably talk about later on in this conversation, even the ideas of what was going on politically, what is going on politically, and how we were able to understand that our relationship as both women of faith, Muslim women of faith, Jewish women of faith, is a relationship that goes beyond what current political circumstances are, what international political circumstances are, and we can elaborate that further. But those the initial meeting was, as we always say, it was electric. We could not sleep. We could not stop talking. We didn't want to break up our gathering, which didn't break up until after midnight on a weeknight. So that really does say something.
Hello, everyone. I'm Nazli Chowdhury. I'm in the DC metro area. And my first interaction with the Sisterhood was right after I had moved to the state from New York. So I moved here an empty nester. Both my sons just started college. And so I moved to a new state and was in an empty nest and didn't have any friends, and my social network and employment, everything was left behind in another state. And a friend from New York told me that she had heard about this Sisterhood thing, and she thinks there's a chapter in the DC metro area. So I connected and joined the chapter. And from the very get-go, on my first meeting, I was just like welcomed in as one of the sisters. It was no big deal. And I instantly had this social circle, and I didn't have to work very hard, because it's so daunting when you, at this age, start anew in another state and have to build up your social network all over again. And knowing the 10 or 12 women at the time in the chapter was almost instant. It's like I had known them forever. And I'm in New York. I've been in the interfaith circles for 20 some years. So it wasn't a foreign environment for me. So I fit in very quickly, and I was embraced and had no trouble connecting on religious and spiritual and political and just work issues. So our chapter to this day, I think, feels like the model chapter of Sisterhood, because we we have so many differences in our chapter in terms of religiosity, in terms of generations. We have college students, and we have grandmothers, and we have rabbis, and we have very secular Jewish women, and we have very religious Muslim women and secular Muslim women. So a lot of differences, and in spite of these differences, we gel really well. We bonded really, really well. And I later found out when I became the regional coordinator that is not always the case. Sometimes there are differences that really can be divisive, and not everyone has overcome those challenges. But our chapter has been this ideal model that I feel like I just got lucky and happened to just step into.
Wonderful. Katie, you mentioned that the reason you started this project was you wanted to learn more about stories of movements. And I'm curious, kind of what lessons have you drawn from the impact of movements after completing this project?
Well, that's such a great question, because there's something that I think comes through a little bit in the film, but in some ways, when I talk to people about the film, I love to talk on just this point of, there's a way in which I feel like, not necessarily by design, Cheryl and Atiya have made this organization that creates leaders in a way that I hadn't seen before. That by just the nature of how things are structured, I would see again and again that women coming from all different perspectives and all different backgrounds in terms of whether they had worked professionally or they had been a stay-at-home mom, and some of them had reached, real heights professionally. Some would not have considered themselves leaders. And to a person, I would see the way in which they would find a new sense of leadership in themselves. And it showed me how much that organizations that don't kind of come in with this sort of intense top-down leadership leaves all this space for people to find sort of a new way to lead their communities, whether they define their communities as quite small or they expand out. I don't know, that was something that would strike me again and again working on the film, is how successful it was at leading women to kind of figure out what it meant to take the next step for them at that point in their life and in their particular community towards being some kind of a leader.
Fascinating. And I think we see a bit of that in the film as we look at how the Sisterhood has expanded to teen chapters. Mm-hmm. For example, Cheryl and Atiya, I'm wondering, what do you envision for the future of the Sisterhood? Is it more teen chapters? Is it on college campuses? You mentioned, an expansion to other countries. I'd love to hear, what's next? What do you envision?
Well, if I had my dream, Sisterhood would no longer be functioning because it wouldn't be needed. So I wouldn't be true to my heart if I didn't say that. The dream is one in that, and we're doing it right now, is that we have opened up the tent. And while we acknowledge that the chapters are very important and one of the strongest ways to build relationships, it's not the only way. And being part of a chapter may not be the right thing for every adult woman and every teenage girl. So we now provide membership, open membership, to anyone who identifies as a woman and who identifies as being Muslim and Jewish in North America and slowly in other places in Europe. The teens are our future. They are absolutely critical. We have seen the chapters grow. They will continue to grow. They're doing some incredible things. A lot of what they focus on is social action and social justice work. We anticipate always growing the number of chapters. Just as important as the number of chapters is reaching others. And just as important as reaching others is giving people the opportunity to learn from one another, to celebrate where we have commonalities. Most important is to celebrate our differences and learn from each other. As you heard in the movie, it's really easy to hate someone you don't know. When you know them, it's harder. And when you care about them and when you love them, it's impossible. My personal goal is to have every Muslim and Jewish woman and teenage girl in North America and slowly throughout Europe loving each other. And then the separation that especially the media likes to place on both our faith groups toward each other will disappear. We will be one. And together we are so much stronger at peacefully combating the hate that surrounds both of us, because we know the same people that hate Jews hate Muslims, and the same people that hate Muslims hate Jews. We also know together we are so strong. And we also know that the focus of both our faith groups is one another. And it doesn't matter what color you are. It doesn't matter what faith group you are. We are all one, and we are all one person's children. So my dream is for that caring and love to spread to all of us. It's one of the major steps in eroding the hate.
So obviously echo what Cheryl set forth and really underscore one of the objectives of the Sisterhood is to create spaces, environments where sisters can come together and talk about tough issues. And hopefully also, talk about tough issues, but also develop friendship and develop love for each other. And I don't think that's a very common thing. We work with all sorts of people in our work environment. And you might be curious to ask someone of a different faith, questions, but it's not always appropriate in, let's say, work environments or some other environments. But we're trying to create those spaces where difficult questions can be asked in a space where that someone has your back, that there is love, that the question is being asked out of curiosity, not out of a place of someone looking down upon you. And I would hope, what is our future? Our future looks, that our future can look like that we have so many spaces like that where we can have these kinds of conversations that, again, finding out what our differences, and those differences should not be a barrier to a relationship, should not be a barrier to future relationships. And also we will find out the multitude of common values that we do share. But it all starts with that space. It all starts with that space of coming together, shedding our biases, shedding that feeling that this person is the other, shedding the feelings of maybe hate. Some people feel hate. And Cheryl touched on this. What we found to be so fascinating is that these spaces get created, and oftentimes the groups that are having the most vibrant discussion, I put vibrant like in air quotes, are the intra-faith conversations that are going on amongst the Muslims or amongst the Jewish sisters, which is really exciting. And that's something that we can all learn from each other. So my personal goal is that we just continue to spread the word. And we are so grateful to Katie and Kirsten for doing this film, because it spreads the word, and it spreads the word in a way that we could never have ever done. And we are so grateful to them to support us and to amplify our message.
Thank you. You mentioned tough issues. It's certainly been a tough 4 years. Exhausting, I would think. I feel exhausted. I'm curious for Rachel and Nazli on the local level in your local chapters, how have you supported each other as sisters through this difficult time? And also kind of what opportunities or obstacles have you seen for sustaining and growing your chapters?
So I think I probably wouldn't have made it in the last 4 years if I didn't have the sisters. I think right after the election, we all felt depressed. Most of us felt depressed and didn't know where to go from there. I know I personally spent 2 days baking, and I baked like everything I knew. And then I was like, what am I going to do with all this? So what I did was call my Sisterhood chapter sisters and said, do you guys want to come over and maybe we can have like a healing circle? We can just, commiserate together and eat lots of baked goods, which I have plenty of. And so this is what we did. And it turned out to be this 4-hour session of us just holding each other in love. And we all needed it. And back then we could hug. So we hugged and we talked and we ate lots of cake and cookies and had tea. And everyone said that that was just about the most healing thing that they have ever done. And it just gave me an idea of having this kind of like a healing circle of checking in with each other. And, you know, there is a lot of pain and hurt out there. And if we can be that soft spot, that loving space, that empathetic sister to each other once in a while. So we continued those healing circles within our chapter and then opened it up to the region of the 12 chapters that are in the DC, Virginia, Maryland area, and opened up these healing circles to them as well. So that was something that really I needed, and I didn't realize that all my other sisters needed it just as much. And how we have sustained ourselves, like I said, we've continued with the healing circles because we felt like we needed to do this. When last year, when there was so many hate crimes going on, and especially when there was a shooting in the synagogue in Philadelphia? Pittsburgh, and so in New York, in New Jersey, there were so many incidents of hate. We attended and held vigils for our Jewish community. We showed up, Muslim sisters from all the chapters showed up in support, and we spoke up. We spoke up and we stood next to our sisters in support, and our hearts were broken that there is this level of hate in a country that is filled with immigrants. We're all from somewhere. And as far as, you know, my background goes in Islam, we think of the human family as our family, that our differences are divinely, is part of the divine plan, that our differences are so that we may come to know each other, we may come to embrace and respect and learn from each other. There are learning opportunities for us in our differences, and they're not meant to divide us. They're meant for us to learn from each other. And I wholeheartedly believe in that. And I embrace people's differences. And just like we do in our family, you know, we overlook differences that we may not agree with, but we don't discard our family. And if you just extend that same thinking to the human family, and sure, they might look different, they might believe differently, they might do many things differently, but you can, have a civil discourse, something that we've lost in our country, to be able to, in a cordial way, disagree with each other. It's okay to disagree with each other. I mean, it's great to come together on commonalities, but we don't have to agree on everything. But we don't have to denigrate or demonize another for having those differences. We can embrace those differences just as well. We don't have to tolerate them, but we can say, okay, it's these are differences. We don't agree on that, but there are many things that we could agree on, and go from there. And as hard as it's been, like I said, if I didn't have my sisterhood chapters to fall back on and to rely on for the strength and hope to keep going, it would have been difficult, because like I said, I don't have any family here, and I moved here and I don't have my social network. So I've relied very heavily on my sisters.
I will say that in terms of supporting and being there for each other during these difficult times, I mean, I described what happened at the conferences and how that felt to me, and I think for a lot of the women who were there. And then, unfortunately, we've had a lot of opportunities to show up for each other. In Bloomington, actually, where Katie is from, a couple of years ago, there was an incident where a Molotov cocktail was thrown into a mosque very close to the office of the imam. And there was a huge interfaith gathering, and I was able to show up there with my sisters, with our huge Sisterhood of Salam Shalom banner, and it felt really good to be able to be there together. And after the Pittsburgh shooting, we had thousands of people show up at our synagogue. And we had a program, and I happened to be from Pittsburgh, so it was sort of an extra tender, difficult time for me. And it was so heartening that my sisters were there and they were at the front of the sanctuary and coming and hugs. And, unfortunately, we've had to show up for each other for those things. After Christ Church, I happened to be on a civil rights trip at the time, and I woke up to that news. And, I think whereas before I would have been devastated because this is a horrible thing to happen to any people, but it was very personal. So I texted all of my chapter members, and so it was very personal because I had actual friends to reach out to that I knew that this was deeply affecting. So I think that that's been one of the, good, bad things. We've had a lot of horrible things happen, and we've had people there to show up for us immediately and in a very important personal way. In terms of challenge, I think a lot of chapters have this similar challenges of getting people to show up and having a good balance of Muslims and Jews in their chapters. I think that's pretty common. And I've worked really hard as a co-chair to try to keep the relationships going, to try to do different things, meet as chapters, meet in small groups to do, voter registration, postcard writing. And right now we're trying to pair women up to take walks because that's something that we can do, one-on-one. But it's not easy. People are busy. They have families and work lives, as Atia said. And yet I think this has been a really important oasis for a lot of the women. So it's really just trying to keep people connected and I know that it's important to our women. It's just really making sure that we, have a lot of contact points to be sure we're staying connected.
Absolutely. I'm curious about another tough issue mentioned in the film. You talked about politics, and you specifically gave tools for chapter leaders to discuss the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And I really appreciated how the film took us into the small group discussions. And I was really curious what happened after chapter leaders brought these tools and frameworks back to their chapters. Whoever feels more inclined to speak on that, I'd love to hear what came after that.
Sure, I'll go ahead and then ask anyone to join in. First of all, when we started, the two of us started the Sisterhood, we decided that we would be all about relationships and focusing on how we overcome the challenges that we face as Muslim and Jewish women of faith, living in America, now North America, and as I said, we've expanded. The Israeli-Palestinian issue was an issue and part of the challenge, the overarching challenge. And after working with several experts in the field in interfaith dialogue and engagement work, several other organizations that, while not doing the same thing, were working on Muslim, Jewish, or interfaith things, it was clear to us that first we had to build trust and respect in order for the sisters to listen with their hearts, not their ears. If you're only listening with your ears, your goal is to look for those differences. Instead of celebrating the differences and learning from them, your goal is to enter into discussion, not dialogue, and to convince the person that they're wrong. That was the last thing we happened. That's when relationships unravel. Our goal was to really get to know each other, to learn from each other and respect each other, and to see the world through each other's eyes. When you do that, and I hear my sisters tell their stories, whether they're Jewish or Muslim, I'm listening with my heart, I'm not listening with my ears. Only then can I say, wow, I never thought of things that way. I don't have to change my opinion. I grow from it, and I learn from it, and I see the world differently. So it's very important we reach that point. To this day, there are chapters that are just starting, that are brand new, that we ask not to enter into the Israeli-Palestinian conversation. We ask all chapter members, whether they're in a chapter or in the overall big group, to please wait until you're no longer using your ears, but you're using your heart. And we are constantly working on developing new resources, new tools, and new partners to help us enter into this. We work with the Parent Circle. We work with Combatants for Peace. We work with the Center for Nonviolent Communication. We work with organizations that help us to really learn from our differences and to respect them and to grow from it, as opposed to trying to create more divisiveness within. And I think that's really important. Those organizations that have made it in the interfaith world, especially in the Muslim and Jewish world, that have gone with the approach that we take.
So when we first formed this organization, Cheryl and I did a lot of research, and we met with other women's groups. They were different though. They were Arab Jewish, Palestinian Jewish organizations, and every single one of those groups ended up collapsing. And there was I believe, a common reason. And that reason is that they were founded on a mission of conflict. And that's not what we're about. We are founded on a perspective of Muslim and Jewish women of faith. We understand that the Muslim-Jewish relationship is a relationship that is over 1,400 years old, and not only to be looked at through the lens of the current contemporary political situation in Israel and Palestine. And one of the things that we talk about kind of disseminating stereotypes is that, when oftentimes, when we get together as Muslim and Jewish women, there's this, we're going to bond over hummus. Hummus is common. And I'm like, actually, I'm half British and half Indian. I didn't have hummus until I was an adult. A very small percentage of Muslims are actually Arab. And so, even the issue of Israel and Palestine is not necessarily a high priority for all Muslims. But nonetheless, the city of Jerusalem is a site where Muslims believe that our prophet ascended to heaven, so that the Temple Mount is a very significant place for all Muslims. And beyond that, we look at it as a humanitarian issue. So our discussion of Israel and Palestine, given all of that, really took us as our, I would say, Cheryl and our journey as charter chapter founders, as Sisterhood founders, took a process of about 10 years or so. And that was because we established a relationship of trust. And we, and I've said this story before, that I maybe thought Cheryl thought X, and she thought maybe I thought Y. And we kind of just kept it. But then establishing a place of trust, the multitude of trips that we've been on together, in Bosnia, and in Bosnia, Albania, Azerbaijan, visiting the border in Arizona, the US-Mexican border, going to Auschwitz and Germany, all of these trips and all of the work that we've been doing, every single conference, we're on our 5th annual conference this year, every single conference we've had a program on this issue with different facilitators on the Israel-Palestine issue. All of these steps over the last 10 years took us to a place where we had a 2.5-day retreat with our board, and we came up with a statement that was a unanimous statement. And it was maybe uncomfortable for, maybe some of the sisters on the edges, but we came up with a statement that I think everyone was pretty unanimous. Well, we were unanimously comfortable issuing that statement on this issue, looking at it from a humanitarian perspective. But I think, and I don't think there really is any other organization in the country that has been able to do that. But it took that relationship building to come to that point. And as Cheryl said, to always focus on the fact that ultimately we are American Muslims and Jews. And we have to realize that whoever hates us as Muslims are hating my Jewish sister as well. And if we don't realize that we need to come together on the points that we agree on, and maybe we're going to disagree on other things, then that's just a sad reality. And thank God, I'll say alhamdulillah, we were able to reach a new height. And I'm very proud of our organization for doing that.
And I will just add to that, Emma, that every interview that the two of us are take part in, they ask the question about Palestine and Israel, and the media tries to divide us on it. So much of the public tries to divide us on it, and we won't let them. We absolutely will not let them. That wasn't our goal when we started. That wasn't our goal last week, and it's not our goal today, and it won't be our goal tomorrow.
Thank you both, and thank you all. As we conclude our panel today, I want to ask each of you briefly if you can share in just a sentence or two exactly what Cheryl just reminded us of, which is something we share or something we admire or respect about each other. So for the Jewish panel members, I'd love for you to share something that you admire about Islam or the Muslim community, and vice versa for our Muslim panel members, if you can share something you admire about Judaism or the Jewish community. And Katie, if you'd love to share both, perhaps, or just something that you found valuable through this journey of the film, and then we'll end for today.
So, thinking about it real fast, it's pretty easy to answer. As a fairly observant Jewish woman of faith, it's often lonely. And many times I feel alone and I feel misunderstood. Since my Muslim sisters are in my life, I have learned how much easier it is to be a woman of faith. I've learned so much more about Judaism because of the questions from my sisters, and they're always asking. I've learned so much more about myself, and I've learned so much more about Islam. It's made me prouder. It's made me way more knowledgeable. It's made me more confident. And I have to say, the other thing that I admire is that these sisters of mine have given me the confidence to say, we're not going to let happen what happened in the late 30s and early 40s happen again. And you heard it in the movie. That's how this whole thing started when I called Athea. Without these sisters, Muslim and Jewish, next to me, I'm not sure I would have had the strength to keep dealing with everything that surrounds me every day. The challenges, so much. I don't think I could have done it without them to keep up the fight. And there's just too many children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren and more to come that we have a responsibility to make this a better world for. And these sisters have personally taught me how to do it based on their faith.
I think that one thing that I admired so much from both the Jewish sisters and the Muslim sisters that I met, and it kind of relates to a scene in the movie where they come, the chapter leaders in Chicago get together for Passover, and they are working together to kind of remember what some of the faith traditions are about, and they're asking each other, and it's just, there's a purity and a bravery in their willingness to say, I'm going to share with you some of our traditions, but I don't have to be an expert. I don't have to be right about everything. We can talk about this and work this out together, and that this is a path. This is the way we're going to forge our friendship, is by bringing our rituals to each other and deepening these rituals together, and not needing to be an expert, and being so open to having that experience in that way was just, I saw that again and again. That scene is a great example of it, but I saw that over and over, and I took that with me and really admired that.
I think for me, there are many things that I admire about my Muslim sisters. We have a diverse group in the sense of people are from different countries, and we have everyone from secular Muslim women to hijabis. And I would say actually the Muslim part of our group is more diverse than the Jewish women. And what I've admired is their openness to learn from each other in terms of the cultures that they're from. As Atiya said, there are Muslim women from all over the place. We have women in our group from Pakistan and Turkey and Somalia. And so their willingness to learn from each other about their differences and how their traditions are celebrated differently. And also the extent to which, whether it's their faith or their culture or their shared values, is integrated into their lives. And again, it's on a, it means something different to each of the women depending on, how much they affiliate or what they observe or don't. But the beauty of the values of the religion of Islam, and I've really come to appreciate that beauty. And I think about, Atiya, some of the texts that you've read in our group gatherings. Just have really been just struck by just the richness and the beauty and the meaning of those teachings.
Wow, this is so sweet. I'm trying to think of something different, and because I agree with everything that's been stated so far. I would have to just be so grateful. I mean, primarily to Cheryl as my sister, for opening her home to me and my family to share in the Jewish holidays. And I just admire how the history, I mean, Jewish history is thousands of years old, and this continuation of celebrating rituals. And that's something I really admire, whether it's Sukkot, which we're in right now, Passover, Hanukkah. Cheryl, I think I've been there for maybe every holiday. And I just so appreciate the celebration of these rituals. And I think it's because women carry on that tradition. It's women, I think, in every religion who are the primary carriers of the tradition. And that's something that I've really learned from. The other thing that I admire, and I laugh with all my Muslim sisters about this, I think, Cheryl, you've heard me say this, and I'm going to bring it down to a very specific moment when we were together in our Sisterhood Building Bridges trip to Azerbaijan. We were in the city of Baku. We were in an Orthodox synagogue, and I forgot the holiday right now.
Purim.
And, Orthodox synagogues are very similar to mosques because there's a separation of how women and men pray separately. And the amount of joy that we had celebrating the holiday of Purim together, I just thought to myself, I wish, and I've been a member of my mosque board for 20 years. I'm very involved with the mosque, but I never felt that kind of joy. Our sermons are very serious. Our prayers are very serious. And I love the singing and the joy that I feel when I'm with my sisters in their houses of worship. So those are the two things, in addition to everything else you guys said, those are the two things that I want to highlight.
I guess that's my turn. I'm trying to narrow down what I can share, but there's so many things I admire about the Jewish community. Their history, their rituals, and how they have, most of the friends that I have invite me to their homes for any of their holidays, and I love that they open their home to me and share their traditions. And even though their traditions might be different from home to home, they're just I love the intergenerational participation in the holidays. Like, the grandchildren are there and they participate in readings. It's from certain parts of the tradition and so on. And so I love that inclusivity of family and friends in celebrating holidays. And I think one of the things that was funny just recently, I learned a new Hebrew term in how to say, have a good fast for Yom Kippur. And I learned it in we have several WhatsApp groups in the Sisterhood. Like I belong to so many of them. There's my own chapter. There's the chapter that went to Germany and Poland. So I have several of them. So I learned this term in one chapter, and I wanted to impress my Jewish sisters. So I put it in the other chapter, and some of the Jewish sisters privately said, "You know more Hebrew than I do. I've never even heard of this term." So I was like, yeah. But it's that learning from each other, and I love that most of us come into the Sisterhood with open hearts and minds, and we want to learn. We are curious. We want to learn from each other, and really we create joy within our chapters, because I think the joy of learning different perspectives, different traditions, different ways of doing things. I think there is so much love and joy in that, and I think that's part of the divine plan that I mentioned earlier. So we're doing it all wrong if we are hating each other for our differences. We're meant to love each other for our differences and learn from each other. And that's what I feel like the Sisterhood does for me. Every meeting, every encounter, I learn something from my Jewish sisters and my Muslim sisters.
Thank you all. It's with gratitude and love that we end this conversation, and I look forward to learning from you and sharing this film with others in the Twin Cities community and beyond. So thank you again.
So much.
Emma.
Thank you for having us.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Emma.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.